Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, we continue our focus on the heightened tensions between India and Pakistan and ask a panel of experts where they see things heading and whether a devastating war could be on the cards. Hello and welcome to the programme. A day after India struck multiple locations in Pakistan and Kashmir, tensions remain high between the two neighbours, despite global leaders urging de-escalation. Well, Pakistan's chief military spokesman says that Pakistan shot down 25 drones overnight, calling it, quote, yet another blatant military act of aggression against the country. Well, the drones were brought down in and around major cities like Lahore, Gujranwala and Rawalpindi. That's a sign that they reached well into Pakistan's heartland. Rawalpindi is, of course, home to Pakistan's military headquarters. And close to Lahore, the Pakistani military says that a drone hit a military site, leaving 4 soldiers injured.
These Harab drones, which are Israeli drones, are considered the Rafale of drones in terms of technology. I am happy to tell you that the Indians got scared and could not send their planes and pilots because we had already shot down 5. They then approached us with 25 drones, which they think are top of the line.
Well, Pakistan's information minister also added that his country had killed, quote, 40 to 50 Indian soldiers, this along the de facto border in the disputed Kashmir region.
At the line of control, we have not only killed 40 to 50 Indian soldiers, but we have also destroyed their entire brigade headquarters. This is a major success.
Well, India, for its part, is warning that any Pakistani military action will be met with a, quote, very, very firm response. Well, these statements come a day after New Delhi launched missile strikes in retaliation for an attack it blames on Islamabad.
Our response was targeted and measured. It is not our intention to escalate the situation. However, if there are military attacks on us, there should be no doubt that it will be met with a very, very firm response.
Let's get more analysis now. We can speak to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Indian Congress leader and chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee for External Affairs. He joins us from Thiruvananthapuram. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Tharoor. Let me just start by asking you a very simple question. Are India and Pakistan on the brink of all-out war?
I certainly hope not. Certainly India has no interest in that whatsoever. All India wanted to do was to make it very clear that people from Pakistan can't just come across the border, kill innocent civilians who are just enjoying a tourist holiday and walk back across without having to pay a price for it. So all India did was react in self-defense to a terrorist outrage. And India did so in an extremely careful and calibrated manner, and making sure they struck only known terrorist bases and headquarters, did so only at night when there were likely to be no civilians wandering around the streets, and did so while very carefully avoiding striking any government or military installations in Pakistan, very clearly signaling that this was not the first salvo in a protracted war, but rather a one-off reprisal for a terrorist attack. Sadly, Pakistan chose to overreact. There were severe artillery barrages across the line of control, killing 19 Indian civilians and hospitalizing 59 people with grave injuries. India only retaliated also in kind with artillery shells. But then when Pakistan decided to target Indian military installations by sending drones and missiles across, they were stopped and intercepted by Indian air defense, and India in retaliation attacked Pakistani air defense. Now, again, it's very, very clear that India is not escalating, it is merely reacting.
Okay.
If Pakistan chooses to stop its unnecessary provocations, India will not act. I'm quite sure about that. There is no proactive military engagement coming from the Indian side beyond the attacks in reprisal to the terrorism. Nothing at all.
Okay, Dr. Tharoor, you raised lots of points there. Let me pick up on one of them. You say India's response has been precise and restrained, but according to the reports we've seen, children are amongst the dead in the attacks in Pakistan. A mosque was destroyed. I mean, can we really say they've been precise and restrained?
These are extremely well-known terror bases, the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Bahawalpur and the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba in Muridke. These are not innocent places. If there were sadly any civilians staying there, there were families of terrorist leaders or those training to be terrorists. I'm really sorry to say this because we have absolutely no interest in behaving like terrorists and killing civilians. There is no question in my mind that India would have been very happy to merely dismantle the terrorist infrastructure rather than even take a single human life. But the fact is that these are places known and listed not just by Indian authorities, but by the international intelligence community. The agencies concerned are proscribed on the sanctions list of the United Nations Sanctions Committee. They are in no way innocent places, schools or mosques or homes. These are, unfortunately, places where terrorists are trained, financed, equipped, and dispatched to kill innocent civilians in India. That's what India was reacting to.
And Dr. Tharoor, the people we speak to in Pakistan counter your narrative, and you're quoted in the newspapers as saying this is a state, we're talking about Pakistan, that sponsors terrorism in the most vile manner. So you're suggesting the Pakistani government sponsors these organizations. I don't know what you think the motive would be for Pakistan to do such a thing. They're also asking me every time I put this question to them, what's the evidence? What's the evidence, sir?
Well, as far as evidence is concerned, don't forget that Pakistan is a master of denial. They denied having anything to do with the Mumbai attacks that killed 170 people on 26/11/2008 until one of the terrorists was caught alive and the Pakistanis had to admit that he and everything he said came from them. They denied even knowing where Osama bin Laden was until he was found in a military encampment not far from a Pakistani army base inside Pakistan. This is the Pakistani route. It's constantly show us the evidence. Well, I mean, the fact is there is enough circumstantial evidence and there are intelligence intercepts on the basis of which India is acting. And India has absolutely no other reason to do this. Let's understand something very clearly, Tom. India is a status quo power. It wants nothing that Pakistan has. It is focused on growing its economy, improving its high technology, providing a future for its young people. It is entirely happy to be left alone by Pakistan, and it'll leave Pakistan alone. Pakistan is a revisionist power. It claims territory India holds. It is a bigoted power that wishes to take over parts of India on the grounds that the people living there happen to share the same religion as the Pakistanis. Well, there are 200 million Indian Muslims who share the same religion as the Pakistanis. Do they want to take them all over? It's a preposterous approach that the Pakistanis have been adopting. They have been deploying terrorists for 30 years in pursuit of their desire to, quote unquote, bleed India by 1,000 cuts and to capture the territory of Kashmir. They're not going to get it. They have failed for 30 years. They're going to fail for another 30. Then the sad, sad lesson that they must learn and have failed to learn is that terrorism is not the answer. Killing innocent civilians will invite reprisals, and we are scaling up the reprisals with each outrage. In 2008, after Mumbai, India tried diplomacy, tried grey-listing Pakistan, tried blacklisting the agencies concerned in the Sanctions Committee. Some years later, when there was an attack in Pathankot, the Prime Minister even invited the Pakistani intelligence to join the investigation of the attack. They came and they went back to Pakistan and said, oh, the Indians did it to themselves. That was the last straw. The next terrorist attack, India sent a squad across to attack the very base from which the attack had come.
Okay.
The next terrorist attack in Pulwama, India did an airstrike, just one. The next terrorist attack, this time in Pahalgam in Kashmir, India hit 9. How much longer do the Pakistanis want to play this game? India is prepared to play it. But India is much happier to be left alone. And that's what we will urge the Pakistanis to do.
As the conversation goes on, I'd like to talk to you about diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation. But one thing you've put on Twitter, I just want to ask you about it because I was curious myself. You've praised on the application X the code name Operation Sindoor, which has been launched by India. You've said it's a brilliant name. Just tell us why it's significant and why you think it's such an appropriate name for this military operation.
Sindoor is the vermilion reddish mark that women who are married put right there in the middle of their foreheads when they part their hair. And the image that was seared into the nation's consciousness after the terrorist attack in Pahalgam was of a newly wedded, now newly widowed bride on her honeymoon, kneeling disconsolately by the body of her slain husband, weeping. In other words, a terrorist attack had wiped the sindoor off her forehead, because only married women wear it. It was a very emotive, emotional term to remind people of what had happened and why this action was necessary, that innocent civilians, including this young woman, and by the way, a few other women who were widowed in the process of the same attack, had all experienced. I might add that at the end of that, there is also undoubtedly the evocative thought that the color of the sindoor is not that different from the color of blood. And that was what was spilt by the terrorists in our country. I thought it was a very, very evocative, emotional, and powerful choice to name the operation that way.
Okay, so thank you for helping us decipher that, because that's a very interesting explanation. I'd like to ask you now about efforts to broker some sort of a solution. Before we start talking about where this might head to and look at all the chilling options, bearing in mind that you're both nuclear powers, let's try to be optimistic for a moment. In a grave crisis, there is sometimes an opportunity to iron out some of these nearly 80-year-old issues that exist between India and Pakistan. Do you have any optimism that we could perhaps turn this into an opportunity?
Look, first of all, as far as the present crisis is concerned, there is no need to call upon India to exercise restraint, because India is already exercising restraint. It has announced it will not initiate a single military action, but it will react if there is military action imposed upon it. So all the international community needs to do is to get Pakistan to behave, is to tell them to stop attacking. The moment they stop attacking, the moment they can find any excuse to claim their honor is satisfied, that would be the end of that. India has no desire to prolong this. As I said, we are, first of all, a status quo power. We want nothing from them. Second, we are focused on our own growth, and we have no desire to be distracted from that. We are not interested in going to war.
Okay,
but if Pakistan wants war, they will get it. And I think very few people doubt which of the two countries has greater staying power in a war. So that's on the present situation. I think the ball is entirely in Pakistan's court. They can stop any prospect of increased conflict now. India has not put a foot on the escalatory ladder. Pakistan has. So that's the first and most important thing to understand. On the larger question, no, sir, we are not going to allow terrorists to allow Pakistan to get what they want, which is to internationalize the dispute and to provoke a negotiation or a mediation to get them what they want. What terrorists have failed to achieve, they are not going to get. It's as simple as that. We could have talked to the Pakistanis. There have been many, many occasions we've tried to talk to them. There were the famous back-channel negotiations for 4 years between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and General Musharraf. The truth remains, however, that every time these processes of talking have been ended by a Pakistani terrorist attack. No one in India has any inclination to talk to the Pakistanis while they're pointing a gun at our heads.
So who is going to talk to them?
And we can see about whether and about what we might talk one day. Not now.
Dr. Tharoor, who can talk to the Pakistanis and talk them down from this situation and help de-escalate? Who would they listen to? Because it doesn't sound like there's a huge amount of appetite in Washington to get even the slightest bit involved in this conflict.
So it seems, though Secretary of State Rubio did say that he was going to speak to both countries' foreign ministers and national security advisors, and if he's done so, I'm sure that the only message he would give is we don't want to see this getting out of hand. The Chinese issued a very interesting statement. China is Pakistan's quote-unquote all-weather friend, and Pakistan has for some years now been a de facto client state of China. China controls 30% of Pakistan's debt, on top of which you have the big China-Pakistan economic corridor running through the country, which is of some economic value to China as well. So one would assume that that is one patron the Pakistanis would listen to. China has issued a very interesting statement saying that both India and Pakistan are their neighbors. They don't want to see a war in their neighborhood between neighbors, and they would like there to be peace and understanding and calm. Now, if China gives that message to Pakistan, that might be something Islamabad would be well inclined to heed.
Okay, and in terms of the sentiment towards the United States in India, I want to ask you about a piece in the Times of India online edition. It says, quote, the US Vice President J.D. Vance urges restraint, sparking outrage. That's the headline of an article. And it suggests that India feels backstabbed by the United States. And I just wondered whether that was a perception you felt and whether it's a widely shared feeling.
As I said, I haven't actually seen that article, so I don't know what the author intended. But to my mind, we have already announced restraint. We have made it very clear that our operation was in retaliation for a terrorist outrage, and that was it. That it was, in fact, the word used in the public briefing was it was non-escalatory in nature, that India was not intending to escalate further. So you can counsel restraint all you like, you're preaching to the converted. On the other hand, tell the Pakistanis to exercise restraint, and that will be the end of that. It's Pakistan that somehow feels an obligation to somehow react further, having already initiated this problem with a terror attack. They want to continue to fire back at India. And as I say, if they do, India will have to give it back to them. We have our own self-respect. But as long as Pakistan decides that they're not anxious to have an all-out war, they will not be one. If, however, the Pakistani army, which is deeply unpopular in its own country, has decided that they actually do want a war in order to shore up their faltering and tottering image as the savior of the nation, then, of course, the Pakistani military will get what it wants. It gets what it wants in Pakistan anyway, and India is not going to lie back and take it lying down.
Okay, I mean, the alternatives to discussion, diplomacy, mediation are pretty chilling. I mean, there is scope here for escalation, there's scope here for miscalculation. Up until this point, has there been any saber-rattling, nuclear saber-rattling, I should say, on either side that you've detected?
Well, they can't be on India's side because India has a declared, published, and long-established policy of no first use of nuclear weapons. So India would never rattle any sabers of a nuclear kind because that is the Indian policy. Pakistan, on the other hand, does not have such a policy and has implied that it would be willing to use nuclear weapons. So again, the ball is in Pakistan's court. You do understand that equivalence between the two countries on any of these grounds is completely false. You have a terrorist providing state and you have a terrorist victim state. You have a state that has refused to abjure nuclear weapons on their first use. You have another state that has absolutely refused to use nuclear weapons first. So, I mean, there is no equivalence, there is no comparison. As far as I'm concerned on these matters, what really applies right now is the great importance of persuading Pakistan to dial down its own misbehavior.
Okay, so where do you see this heading to? What are your predictions, Dr. Tharoor?
Well, I'd like to predict that at some point, people in other capitals will tell Pakistan, you've fired enough shells, you've killed enough Indians, your honor is satisfied, lay off. And if capitals don't say that to Pakistan, and they don't say it firmly enough, and I mean particularly Beijing, then indeed all bets are off, and you might well see Pakistan being tempted to escalate for very short-term military reasons in their country. I certainly hope it doesn't come to that, because in the long term, there's no way they can gain from such a conflict. They've already earned the opprobrium of the world as a terror-providing nation, as the hosts of Osama bin Laden, as the people who spawned the Taliban, and having, as Hillary Clinton evocatively said, having nurtured vipers in their backyard. They've been bitten by the same vipers they've nurtured. This is a country that really, really needs all the goodwill it can get from the rest of the world. And for that reason, what Pakistan needs to do right now is to stop its military provocations, do not embark on any further misadventures, and let this thing die down. India certainly does not want to prolong it.
And just lastly, I mean, would you say in India there's unanimity on this issue right across the political spectrum? Do all Indians sing from the same song sheet here?
Very, very strongly so. And in fact, India, I mean, I speak for an opposition party, and the opposition party, the Congress party, was the first to stand up and say we stand with the government and behind our armed forces in this particular moment of national crisis. We do have domestic political differences. Those will be addressed when the crisis is over. Right now, we are all united, and I see very, very little dissent. Of course, there are people who prefer peace to war. So does any sensible human being on the planet. But when war is thrust upon us, it would only be a coward who refuses to fight back. And we will fight back if it's thrust upon us.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. A pleasure talking to you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Raoof Hasan, the former assistant to the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, who joins us from Islamabad. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've spoken before, in fact, about the issue of the incarceration of Imran Khan. I just want to pick up on something you've put on X, on the application formerly known as Twitter. You asked the question, how are we to respond to this unprovoked aggression? In India, they would say this wasn't unprovoked. This was the consequence of the Pahalgam attack in April. What do you see as the provocation?
Well, it is totally unprovoked. When Pahalgam happened, there were two things, that India should have listened to. Number one, we wanted some credible evidence, that they could have presented to us or to the international community regarding Pakistan's involvement. Or they could have joined an independent, transparent investigation into the incident. If they had opted for either of the two, we would have said, we would have come to the conclusion of it as to whether Pakistan was involved or Pakistan was not involved. We are not involved. We were not responsible for what happened at Pahalgam. But India, totally unprovoked, they refused to provide credible evidence with regard to Pakistan's involvement in this incident, and they also refused to join an independent investigation into the incident, so that the truth could unravel. So under the circumstances, there is absolutely nothing else that one could say that this assault has been totally unprovoked. Then there's another point here which I would like to make. Pakistan was accused within 10 minutes of the incident happening. Within 10 minutes, they had accused Pakistan of involvement. Now, is 10 minutes enough time for any country to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the details of the incident and those people who were involved? Absolutely not. So, if you are pointing a finger at Pakistan's direction and at Pakistan's involvement, within a space of 10 minutes after the incident had happened, it speaks of a premeditated mindset.
Okay, sir. Let me put this to you, though.
Another important.
Let me put this to you. You've already said it. You've said it also on X in one of your postings. You've said this was a false flag operation, what happened in Pahalgam. I mean, how can you be sure it was a false flag operation? What's your evidence?
What is a false flag operation? False flag operation, something, that you orchestrate yourself.
Yes, but how do you know it's a false flag operation?
For what you actually want to do.
How can you be so sure?
In the absence of India agreeing to either of the two options, that I've already discussed with you, we can only refer to it as a false flag operation. India had operated with a premeditated mindset. They wanted to do this. They wanted to destabilize Pakistan. They wanted to accuse Pakistan of things that we're not responsible for. So, this is just one of those terms, that has been used in the post that you are referring to.
So you say India orchestrated this by itself. I mean, why would India do that? What would be their motive?
Well, India has been planning to, be the big brother of the region for a long time. And unfortunately, in this regard, it has had the support of some Western countries also in the larger game of containing China. And Pakistan is a bulwark in the achievement of that aim on the part of the Indian government and the state of India. Consequently, weakening Pakistan so that it is forced to given to Indian hegemony in the region basically is one of the principal objectives of India's foreign policy. As I said, supported by some of the Western countries also. But being placed in this region, obviously, we have relations with other countries, and we have consistently taken the position that we will never accept India's hegemony in this part of the world. And this is something, which is not palatable for them. And they, from time to time, have indulged in adventurism. And this is the latest of the series of adventurisms that they have indulged in the last, 7.5 decades.
Would you say that the majority of people in Pakistan condemn what happened in Pahalgam?
Well, the government of Pakistan has condemned what happened in Pahalgam. My party and my leader, Imran Khan, has condemned what happened in Pahalgam. His speech can be referred to in that context, We issued a statement, offering sympathies, with the bereaved families, But we also want an independent inquiry into the incident. We're not going to just take India's position on face value because what they say and what they do are two different things, and this is repeatedly, Pakistan has been a victim of that duplicity for a very long time. We still believe that, de-escalation is the way forward. We don't. Pakistan has repeatedly said, that we do not want to escalate. But unfortunately, in the last 48 hours, India has repeatedly assaulted Pakistan. There has been a rain of assaults in Pakistan today after yesterday's missile attacks. They have resorted to drones, and dozens of drones, have been felled in Pakistan, while others have hit some, habitations. So this is ongoing. There is a need to de-escalate, and I think Pakistan is quite willing. I'm sure by the statements that the government of Pakistan has released, I think they're quite willing to de-escalate. But unfortunately, what has happened today, the drone assaults, and then of course the counter assault by Pakistani forces, this is leading to escalation, which is not going to be good for the region, and even more importantly, this kind of tension between two nuclear armed states, can spell disaster.
Sure.
That shit.
Sure. I mean, it could be devastating. Could be devastating for both countries. I mean, what is Pakistan's next move, sir?
Well, since we are not the aggressor, India is the aggressor here, I mean, we are only responding. We are only, under Article 51 of the UN Charter, we are only exercising our right to respond. So we are responding. If India stops attacking Pakistan, I don't think there will be any aggression from Pakistan's side.
But with regards to these militant groups that exist inside Pakistan, I mean, they clearly exist because your Prime Minister, Imran Khan, he tried to bring those groups under control, perhaps with limited success. So we can't deny the existence of these groups, can we?
Well, Pakistan has gone through multiple phases, and I think at this moment in time, as you and I talk, the existence of these groups, virtually is a story of the past, I think we have moved beyond that state. I don't think any of these groups now exist in Pakistan, as an organized whole. Yes, they have operated. They've been here before, but I can assure you, I have empirical evidence with me, that they have been dismantled, and they no longer exist, as organized wholes, which are capable of undertaking operations of the kind that happened in Pahalgam.
Well, India says they most certainly do exist. I think many in the United States are concerned they still exist. The Indian government would go even further and say the Pakistani government sponsors them and funds them. How do you tackle that kind of narrative?
Well, India has been saying it consistently, something happens in India, everything, they have an issue within India, a political issue or an economic issue or a social issue or anything. They always pin the blame on Pakistan. This has become sickening. And I think, there must be an end to this. I think they should learn to tackle their problems, within themselves, rather than pointing a finger, always pointing an accusing finger in Pakistan's direction. It's a tradition. I think it must be discontinued now. I think they must learn.
Okay, you've also suggested online in the last 24 hours or so that the Prime Minister of Pakistan is being rather conspicuously silent in the last day or so. And I'm just wondering what you meant by that and what you think he should be doing and saying differently.
Well, you see, there are two kinds of war which are fought. Like the one that we're fighting at this moment in time. One is the war that is fought by the armed forces of the country, and the other is the war of optics, basically, and that is where leadership plays a very important role. Like when it happened in 2019 and Prime Minister Imran was leading the charge, he was all there as a leader. He led the charge. He led the people of Pakistan. And, when he made that declaration, that we're not going to think of retaliating, we shall retaliate, and he did it. He was all there. He was a colossal presence, The Pakistani leadership has been totally absent from the scene today. There has been no statement made by Nawaz Sharif. There has been no statement coming from the presidency, which is Asif Zardari, and other statements have also been meek. So basically, it is the war of optics, that we unfortunately seem to be losing. On the battleground, that is the responsibility of the armed forces, So they're responding to every assault, that the Indians are undertaking. And I think that they've done a great job, and they shall continue to do a great job. But this war of optics is the responsibility of the political leadership, and that is where I feel, where I'm certain that the leadership in Pakistan at this moment in time, which is not a legitimate and constitutional leadership, they lost the elections, which were won decisively by Imran Khan. Fortunately, they have been imposed in the country, so they do not have the support of the people, and they have been conspicuously absent from the scene in the last 72 hours. They should have been there. They should have been there leading the charge, and unfortunately, no, they're not.
Mr. Hasan, obviously your allegiances lie with Imran Khan, I presume. I don't know if you're still in contact with him, even though he's in prison. But do you think any of this would have happened with him still in power? If he was Prime Minister, would we be in the situation we're in today?
Well, Imran Khan, the presence itself, it would have made a world of difference. He's there. He's a leader. He knows exactly how to command respect, and he has people's support. In the last election held on the 8th of February of last year, he had won 2/3 majority. Unfortunately, that majority was denied to him. So his very presence, it instills confidence, trust, and vibrancy among the people, So that is the difference between him and the rest of them, The rest of them are virtual pygmies in front of him. So, his presence would have been a great factor, like it was in 2019 when India last indulged in similar adventurism. His leadership, played a very major role in blunting the assault, both on the battleground as well as on the political ground.
Sure. I mean, obviously, Pakistan's economy has been in a difficult situation in recent years. I don't know whether the country can afford a full-scale war. Is that where you see things heading, nevertheless? Do you think we are on the brink of a full-scale war?
Well, it's very difficult to make a projection about it at this moment in time. But, the way the Indians have continued to attack Pakistan, it points to a larger game plan. And I'm sure it is going to unravel very soon, possibly tomorrow. In the next 24 to 48 hours, we will know exactly what are India's intentions, because we, as I said, we are only responding to their assaults. And we have to continue assaulting, we have to continue responding, we can't stop that. But I hope and pray that it does not get out of hand, because as I said earlier, two nuclear armed states, can actually, if this continues, and if God forbid, one of the countries has to take recourse to the use of these weapons, that can be absolutely disastrous, So I think wisdom must prevail on both sides. Sanity must prevail on both sides. And I think, a lot of responsibility would also rest on the countries, which are trying to mediate. The Americans are there. The countries in the Gulf are there. They're all trying to play a role. They're all trying to sort of cool things down. But unfortunately, let me make this point here that, India has not been criticized the way it should have been criticized, because India is the aggressor. And India has not agreed to either providing credible evidence, as I said earlier, or joining an independent investigation into the incident. So I think India should have been criticized for not undertaking any of these two options, and instead resorting to naked, unprovoked aggression. Okay. So this is what kind of propels them to continue indulging in this adventurism again and again and again. And I think the world must have to seek parity between India and Pakistan, because that is the only way to maintain peace in this region. I
mean, how real do you think the risk is, therefore, of of all-out war? I mean, does it feel where you are in Pakistan that that's the direction things are heading in?
Well, there is a possibility of an all-out war, like in the, gauging by what has happened in the last 48 hours. I think, there's a lot to be concerned about. The whole day today, drones were falling in one part or the other of the country. It has not left a good impression behind. Obviously there's fear among the people. Some people, I think, have a couple of people have died also, and some people have been hurt. And the counter assault by Pakistan, of course, has left much devastation in India also. And if this continues, and it continues escalating, as I believe that in the last 24 hours, things have escalated, and if that scale of escalation continues, then this is a real prospect, of a full-scale outbreak of war. And that nobody would desire. I would not desire that. My country would not desire that. My leadership, my party, nobody would desire that. I don't think war it leads to any solutions. If Pakistan and India have outstanding issues, they have to sit across the table. And it's here again where India refuses to sit across the table with Pakistan. It is not Pakistan that refuses to sit across the table with India. So it is India's intransigence, which unfortunately has compounded problems in the last so many years. They refuse to engage with Pakistan. Pakistan is always willing to engage with India. So, I think the world must focus on India. The world must begin to focus on India's unwillingness to resolve issues, outstanding issues, in a peaceful manner. Okay. That is a key element to the continuation of this fratricide.
All right, Mr. Hasan. I mean, we're nearly out of time. I mean, obviously these issues, some of them date back the best part of 80 years. Let's just look at the situation we're in today. 30 seconds, if you will. What's your message to India? What would you like to tell the leadership in India? Simple. Sit across the table and talk to Pakistan. You will ultimately have to talk to Pakistan. You can't finish Pakistan. Okay. Sit across the table. Let sanity take over. All right, and talk it out. Okay. Well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate your analysis and your comment. Raoof Hasan, thank you very much indeed for your time today. My pleasure. Thank you. Let's get more now. We're going to speak to Dr. Sajjan Gohel, who is the chair of the NATO Counter-Terrorism Advisory Group and International Security Director at the Asia Pacific Foundation, also a visiting teacher at the London School of Economics. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Dr. Gohel. Let's start by talking about what happened in April in Pahalgam, which triggered the latest tensions we have before us. Unarmed tourists killed in Indian-administered Kashmir. What's your understanding of who the perpetrators were?
Well, an offshoot of the Lashkar-e-Toiba claimed responsibility for that terrorist attack known as the Resistance Front. And they go by that name ostensibly because the Lashkar-e-Toiba, or LET, has been so heavily prescribed internationally through the UN, the US, other countries around the world have taken stiff action against them, but they still operate in other means and other guises through the Resistance Front. And if you look at the attack that was carried out in Pahalgam, very similar to LET operations. They had military-grade equipment. They carried out their attacks execution style. And it was a very disturbing attack, and that's why it's brought us to the situation we're talking about now.
India says the Pakistani military sponsors these groups, somehow funds these groups. Pakistan denies that and denies that it harbors any militant groups on its soil. What's the evidence one way or the other?
I don't think it's any secret that these terrorist groups operate quite openly in Pakistan, and not in some tribal area, but in urban centers of the country. And we have seen that various Pakistani officials from across the political divide have acknowledged that this was a policy of Pakistan. Now, they caveat that by saying that this is what occurred in the past. But the problem is that the past always gets renewed every few years. And Pakistan simply has just not done enough to dismantle this terrorist infrastructure, which doesn't just have a knock-on effect for India, but also for Afghanistan and also to the international community as well. We've seen terrorists being trained in Pakistan, carrying out attacks in the United Kingdom, like the 7/7 bombings. So Pakistan, unfortunately, still has this problem and somewhat denial about having to tackle what they have created and what they continue to allow to exist.
So it sounds like you're coming down on the side that Pakistan is to blame entirely for the situation we're in right now. I don't know whether you would say entirely. But let me ask you about creating what sounds like a Frankenstein on their own territory in the form of these terror groups. I mean, isn't that a very dangerous game to be playing, given that this could all boomerang back, as it appears to have done, and cause serious problems for Pakistan itself?
Well, I use the analogy that you can't hunt with the hound and run with the hare. And that is ultimately what Pakistan's military has done. And I guess to be more precise, this is ultimately the statecraft of Pakistan's military and its intelligence agency, the ISI, who we know has very murky ties with these terrorist groups. The civilian governments in Pakistan, they ultimately don't have much sway or ability. If you look at everything that is transpiring right now, the focus is on the Pakistan Chief of Army Staff, Asim Munir. He is the one that ultimately is going to dictate what Pakistan's reaction is and how they deal with these things.
Okay, so how do we go about resolving this? What broker is needed? Who could the broker be to bring about a peaceful solution?
It's a very important question. We need to have an off-ramp. There's no doubt about it. But ultimately, you need to have good faith from both sides in order for that off-ramp to be achieved. There are countries that have been trying to work behind the scenes for years to try and prevent tensions from escalating. For example, the UAE has been absolutely pivotal to keeping peace and stability between both countries. And the UAE has been really effective in its diplomacy. It doesn't promote it a lot, but it's always behind the scenes. And I think, again, we are seeing Abu Dhabi taking a frontline role in trying to prevent this escalation. And that also has the support from other countries like the United States. So it is important that we find that off-ramp, but I dare say we are still some distance away from it.
Yeah, because the risk of doing nothing and leaving them to it is enormous. We're talking about two nuclear-armed nations, trading exchanges of fire and aerial bombardment and so on. I mean, this is a potentially very dangerous situation. I mean, could this escalate into an all-out war between the two countries?
Well, the conflict has already begun. It is a hot conflict. It is not a full-out war, but we have got further in this conflict than we have for many years. I'd say this is the most intense continuation of a conflict between India and Pakistan since the 1999 Kargil War. So you are looking at a major change. I think what's also interesting here is you've seen how the rules of engagement by India have altered. Go back to the 2019 Balakot airstrike, and since then, India has now adopted this policy of preemptive action, which is to do cross-border strikes against non-state actors. So they targeted the terrorist camps of the Lashkar-e-Toiba in Muridke, the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Walpur, and then also the Hizbul Mujahideen. So you've seen these camps that have existed for a very long time suddenly finding their infrastructure being dismantled.
But the Pakistani guests that we're speaking to keep saying, time and time again, show us the evidence. Show us the evidence these groups are there. Show us the evidence there's any link between those groups that you just mentioned and the Pakistani military. Where is that evidence?
Well, so for example, Pakistan was on the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force for many years, predominantly because it was failing to deal with these terrorist groups. If you look at the Mumbai siege attacks in 2008, where you had a dozen terrorists from the Lashkar-e-Toiba carrying out marauding attacks across Mumbai, targeting railway stations, hotels, a Jewish cultural center. Ajmal Kasab, the lone surviving gunman, gave open testimony to the fact that he'd been trained in this camp in Muridke. And also within the circles of countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, they are fully aware that this has been this open problem. So it's not necessarily about, having to prove it to the point of saying, well, this is Pakistan being caught with its hands in the cookie jar. Look at also the satellite pictures that are being produced right now by commercial satellite companies, these commercial companies that are showing the damage to these terrorist camps that exist. So the evidence is there. It's just a question of how it comes across and how much one is willing to accept it.
Just like to get your thoughts. I mean, it's pretty terrifying when you sort of digest all of this. And you think you've got all of these non-state actors operating, it would appear, with a degree of impunity inside Pakistan, which is a nuclear-armed nation. I mean, this has the potential. I mean, there is room for miscalculation, and there's room for this to turn into something, extremely devastating, isn't it?
I think we've reached that point. You are looking at decades of frustration, it seems, by the Indian government being unleashed in the last 2 days, because there has been this ongoing challenge that these terrorist groups operate in Pakistan, they carry cross-border attacks, and then you see the situation continuing, this very awful cyclical problem. Now that we've got escalated the situation substantially. And again, it goes back to one of your questions about the off-ramp and the ability to potentially find it. And countries like the UAE, the United States, China, Russia, they will all have a stake in trying to help find that off-ramp. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be there anytime soon.
But there's got the potential as well to turn into a sort of a proxy war between the United States and China. If Pakistan gravitates towards China and India gravitates towards the United States, I mean, we've got the makings there of yet another proxy war, haven't we?
It's a very interesting question. You are actually seeing that play out, because keep in mind that Pakistan in this conflict is using Chinese-made hardware. The Chinese jointly manufactured aircraft JF-17 has been, it's believed, been used for this. And it's interesting because Pakistan has been moving away from US-made hardware, partly because of various restrictions. So, for example, even though Pakistan's in possession of F-16s, they cannot use those in this conflict. There are restrictions imposed by the United States, but there are no restrictions when it comes to Chinese hardware. So for the very first time ever, we're seeing Chinese missiles, Chinese equipment being utilized in a hot conflict. And that in itself raises massive potential ramifications, not just for India, Pakistan, but then maybe how you could see a future conflict in the Indo-Pacific itself and how China's weapons fare in conflicts.
I mean, when you look at a lot of the issues between India and Pakistan, I mean, many of them date back to partition. We're talking 78 years. And they're issues that could have and should have really been resolved a long time ago, perhaps when heads were cooler. One of the grievances obviously relates to water that comes from the Himalayas and obviously provides sustenance for agriculture in Pakistan as well as in India. The 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. India's effectively withdrawn from that or suspended that treaty. And it appears that India is using water as a weapon of war. Is India allowed to do that?
Well, keep in mind that, yes, India has suspended its role in the Indus Water System Treaty. At the moment, that hasn't led to anything substantial. I think it is part of the dynamics of this ongoing conflict between India and Pakistan. And the fact that, interestingly, that treaty continued despite all the wars that India and Pakistan fought from 47 to 65 to 71 to 1999. The treaty stayed in existence. The fact that India suspended its role is in many ways, it's a diplomatic move to put pressure on Pakistan. It's also a strategic move to say that potentially, if India wanted to, it could try and do activities that would impact the flow of the water. But keep in mind that that is not that easy. It's not like there's a tap that you just switch off. It's something that would take years for India to actually be able to execute.
Right. I mean, anyone who's seen the River Indus would know it's an enormous body of water, all that water cascading down from the Himalayas. I mean, what would India even do with it what could you do with that volume of water were you to divert it away from the rest of its river flow?
So if there are potential diversions, and again, we have to be careful because that's something that isn't going to be imminent, but supposing that was to happen, it would impact on Pakistan's breadbasket province of Punjab, which is its main agricultural hub, which is very much dependent on the western tributaries of the Indus River system flowing in to Pakistan. Equally, it could also have an impact on on Pakistan's hydroelectric power, because Pakistan is experiencing enormous power shortages. It's a country that is unfortunately going through some really difficult financial times. It is heavily in debt to countries like China, like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia. And I think right now, this is probably the last thing Pakistan needs, but I guess it's also a reminder that the country can actually become a very successful nation if it focused actually on its domestic infrastructure redevelopment and ideally have better relations with India. Because if India and Pakistan actually had very good trade relations, both countries would benefit enormously, and we wouldn't be talking about this terrible conflict that has now unfolded.
Doing my research for these interviews, looking at the commentaries on some of the articles posted online, I mean, there are some in Pakistan who believe that India has got expansionist ideas. It would like to undo the 1947 partition and seize control of Pakistan and absorb it into a greater India. Do those ideas come from nowhere, in your opinion?
I think that in this dynamic of social media, you find a lot of very interesting theories and also conspiracy theories that tend to do the rounds and flow. I think that India in itself is a country of, 1.4 billion. I think it has its own challenges enough to deal with, let alone having to consider taking on hundreds of millions of other individuals. Certainly, India has global ambitions to be a recognized international power, but that hasn't actually stemmed from actually changing the borders with countries. Yes, there is a conflict with Pakistan, and there are disputes that exist, and also with China as well. But you don't see that rhetoric actually being translated into actual policy, in the sense that the conflicts are conflicts. They're not part of an ideological agenda. I think that tends to get spun a lot within social media more than actually having any substantive value.
Just to wrap up, Dr. Gohel, I mean, obviously we're talking about a potentially very dangerous situation, and left unresolved by the rest of the world, it could get even more dangerous. What are your predictions? Where do you see this heading?
Well, I think we have to keep an eye on the next 24 hours, because we're going to have to look at it in increments. We saw the fact that last night Pakistan tried to carry out some strikes using drones. It seemed to have been repelled by the Indians, who then in turn carried out additional airstrikes targeting Pakistani military installations, including an air defense system in Lahore, which is very significant. So we will have to see whether there are follow-up actions or not. It is interesting that all these actions seem to be occurring in the middle of the night. So we have to sort of bear time to see how that transpires, and also to see if both countries are going to say, well, look, we've reached our limit as to how far we are going to go. We're going to draw a line in the sand and we're not going to go further. But we haven't got to that situation yet.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Dr. Sajjan Gohel. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to David Sedney, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Pakistan during the Obama administration. He joins us now from Virginia. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. President Trump, in terms of what we've been hearing on this tension between Pakistan and India, says it's a shame, says he hopes the two nations won't escalate further. I mean, it sounds from that sort of language like there's not much appetite for any kind of US involvement at this stage. Does that sound reasonable?
I think that sounds exactly right. First, again, thank you for having me. The president made these comments in sort of an offhanded way. There's no evidence of any active US involvement, as there have been in prior administrations when tensions have flared between India and Pakistan. And the U.S. relationship with Pakistan has been very fraught. Trump has had a good relationship with Prime Minister Modi in India, but the U.S. ability to influence Pakistan was never much, and it probably doesn't exist at all. So the U.S. role, I think, is going to be pretty much as a cheerleader for peace. Whether that peace happens or war happens, the U.S. will just say, let's go for peace, but won't be able to do anything useful.
So you're saying that that personal relationship that President Trump has with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which does date back to his first administration, could very well come into play here and work to India's advantage?
It could come into play, but if it did come into play, it would work to India's advantage. So any effort to try and resolve the tensions, you'd have to work with both countries. China, of course, is the primary patron of Pakistan. In earlier instances, the US and China have worked together to influence, respectively, India and Pakistan. But given the US tense relationship, Trump's tense relationship with China right now, it's hard to see that happening. But as tensions continue to escalate, as they appear to be, maybe that will happen. But right now, it doesn't seem likely.
Okay, so we've got this new administration in Washington, as everyone knows, and a fairly new US Secretary of State in the form of Marco Rubio, who's got his hands full. There are quite a lot of issues around the world that need settling. And as we've been saying, they're not looking for another one. So who do you think is going to emerge as being the honest broker of peace between these two sides?
That is difficult to say. The Gulf states, particularly Oman, which is currently brokering talks between the US and India, and recently brokered a truce between the US and the Houthis in Yemen. The Omanis have spoken up and appear to be willing to play a role. So that's a possibility that Oman will play that brokering role. But right now, there doesn't seem to be any appetite on either side, Pakistan or India, to seek de-escalatory steps that pressures all the other way. And in that case, there doesn't seem to be anybody who has that kind of influence with either country that can get them to stop escalating, which is the issue right now, because over the last 3 days, we've seen constant escalation. Pakistan has threatened further escalation. They will follow through. They have no choice. So stopping the escalation is step number one. And I don't see anyone really who's in a position to play that role unless someone new steps forward. The U.S. certainly will not.
All the people we've spoken to from India have given us a similar narrative, which is that Pakistan is to blame for this. The Pakistani government sponsors, even funds, or the military indeed, funds these militant organizations that India blames for carrying out the attack in Indian administered Kashmir in April. I mean, does that sound credible to you? Do these groups exist, and do you think their funding really does come from the powers that be in Pakistan?
These groups really do exist. Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is allegedly behind the group that India claims took responsibility for the terrible massacre in Kashmir, has been hosted by Pakistan, supported by Pakistan, and there have been over the years very strong indications that the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate of the Pakistani military, has played a very strong supporting role to their efforts. Will there be anyone find a direct link? Probably not, because these intelligence agencies are good at arranging cutouts. But there's really no doubt that the support for these people who have carried out these attacks this time and in the past does come from inside Pakistan. And if you look at what the Pakistani Chief of General Staff said in his speech a week before the attack, that was very hostile to India, and that described Kashmir as Pakistan's jugular vein, in other words, the key to Pakistan's national survival, it's very hard not to see Pakistan's hand behind this.
So what's their motive then for sponsoring these groups that then go and carry out attacks in India that then in turn result in attacks on Pakistan? I mean, it seems like a fairly, it doesn't seem to serve any logical purpose.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for purpose. In the case of Pakistan, again, I'll go back to this description of Kashmir as a vital national interest for Pakistan's survival. And given the steps that India has taken over the last 5 years or so to reduce, essentially end autonomy, political autonomy in Kashmir, to crack down on a wide range of Muslim groups, and the continuing pressure by Prime Minister Modi and his BJP party to impose Hinduism as a governing tenet of policy, you can see why the Pakistanis feel that they have no other choice. No other country has stepped forward really to speak out effectively against India's crackdown in Kashmir. And if you look at the name of the Indian counteroffensive, Sindoor, which is a particular symbol of Hindu female pride, and the fact that the massacre that took place was very calculated. The Hindu men were separated from their women, including one newly married couple. The women were executed in front of their husbands, and it was very clearly a religiously motivated attack. And the Indian response, especially this name, Operation Sindoor, is religiously motivated. This Hindu-Muslim confrontation has been going on in the subcontinent for 1,000 years. This is a situation where the root causes go back much further than the partition by the United Kingdom of the Indian Peninsula back in the late 1940s, which created the two countries. But these Indian-Muslim tensions, they're at the core of what's going on.
Okay, so clearly some long-standing historic issues between the two countries, going back, as you say, even before 1947. How much concern do you think there is in Washington about what might happen next? I.e., we've got these two nuclear-powered neighbors with considerable animosity towards one another. How worried is the United States this could result in a fully fledged war?
Well, I personally am surprised that there's not more concern. I think there should be more concern. But you have a State Department that only has a couple of senior people who have been confirmed by the Senate. Others are temporary people who have been put in who don't have the confidence of the White House. The president recently fired the national security advisor, Michael Waltz, who had very broad experience around the world in national security policy. Secretary of State Rubio's focus really has been on South America and Central America. The Americas has been his focus of his time in the U.S. Senate. And some of the key issues that the Trump administration is concerned about have been contracted out to a New York real estate developer, Steve Whitberg, who's in charge of Iran, he's in charge of Gaza, and he's in charge of Russia. There's nobody inside this administration with any real experience in dealing with this kind of issue. And I don't really sense that there's much concern. The focus of the president, the administration, is very heavily on tariffs, on economic deals. So I'm concerned that the U.S. is not concerned.
Right, so you're concerned that they're not sufficiently concerned. But when it comes to what you think might happen next, knowing Pakistan as you do, because you've covered it for a number of years, I mean, are you worried personally that the conditions are ripe for a serious confrontation and possibly a devastating one?
I'm very worried. The statement earlier today, and these events are happening as we speak, so something could have happened while we're on the air here. But the statement by the Pakistani Prime Minister right after the Indian counterattack that India will pay for this is clear signal that Pakistan is going to escalate. And the history of both sides have been when they say they're going to escalate, they do escalate. They won't step back from their escalation. Again, in the past, including back in the early 2000s, when nuclear war was a real possibility, it was the U.S. and China working together that diffused that. And it was a very, very close thing. The Chinese remember that. And I think the Chinese and the Russians may be the ones who step in. The Russians with you said Prime Minister Modi has a close relationship with President Trump. India has an even closer relationship with Russia. China has the closest relationship with Pakistan. So if any foreign countries are going to step in to de-escalate this, would be China and Russia, and neither of them want to see a war either. So that would be where I would look to see any serious diplomatic activity coming from Moscow and Beijing.
And just looking at the landscape in Pakistan, obviously the economy's been in a degree of turmoil in the last few years. Politically, there's been some turmoil and some large protests about the jailing of the popular former Prime Minister Imran Khan. And of course, with the US exit from Afghanistan, Pakistan has become a country of perhaps decreased importance in the minds of many in Washington in terms of helping to sort of keep militancy at bay. I mean, do you think that since the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan, the issue of these militant groups has got significantly worse in Pakistan?
The issue of the militant groups has definitely become less important in the United States as the perceived threat from those groups to the United States has decreased. And the U.S. interest in Pakistan has decreased, but not just because of that, but also because the United States has found Pakistan to be difficult to deal with, a country that is not very responsive to U.S. concerns in a number of areas, and of course the growing role of China, which is seen as the dominant foreign player in Pakistan. So for all of those reasons, the United States has pulled back from Pakistan, and the United States has very little leverage with Pakistan.
Right. So, I mean, if Pakistan sort of leans towards China, India turns to the United States, I mean, this risks, doesn't it, becoming a tug of war between Washington and Beijing? I mean, does it then become a proxy war, do you think?
I don't think you would say it's a proxy war. Prime Minister Modi has been very successful in having a good relationship with President Trump, but also having an excellent relationship with President Putin. So this really quadrilateral situation with China, Russia, India, and the U.S. is the prism through which I look at that. And so it's not it's not just the U.S. and China and India. It's the U.S., Russia, China, and India. And China and Russia have very close relations. And again, that's why I would expect any diplomatic initiative to come from there and not the U.S. I just don't think the U.S. has the tools and it doesn't have the interest to play that role at the present time.
Okay, and just lastly, sir, I mean, where do you see this heading to from here?
I see continued escalation. I see the prospect of a nuclear exchange is growing every hour. And that's why I think it's likely that China and Russia will try and step in, but whether they will be effective remains to be seen. I think this is by far the most dangerous situation in the world right now. And I really don't know what will happen in the next few hours, much less the next few days.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. Really appreciate your analysis, David Sedney. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a look back at some of the best interviews of the week. Until then, bye-bye.